What I'd like to do this morning is give you a very brief assessment of what is in the KORUS FTA, and then say a few words about prospects for ratification of the agreement in the U.S. Congress. First point to make is that the KORUS FTA is a historic agreement. It's historic in both economic and political terms. It should enhance our bilateral economic relationship, which is already very strong, more than almost $100 billion in two-way trade each year in goods and services. Don't forget the services. When people give trade statistics, they often forget that. It's an important component of both our bilateral trade and the strength and vitality of our economies. It's also crucial to our long-standing partnership on political and security matters. And on that regard, the developments in the past year or two on the Korean Peninsula and the tensions with North Korea clearly explain the significance of ensuring that we have a strong foundation for U.S.-South Korean relations and a partnership in moving forward for greater peace and prosperity on the entire Korean Peninsula. Now, in terms of the KORUS FTA, in economic terms, it is important because it opens up substantial new opportunities for trade and investment in goods and services. Trade and investment, and that's key for promoting competition and vitality in our economies. At the same time, it is controversial, but it's controversial because it's important. It's because it requires reforms that will increase competition for Korean and American firms, workers, and farmers, and thus require adjustment. And so when you hear the complaints or concerns about politicians, they're focusing first and foremost on the adjustment challenges and not necessarily focusing on how these challenges can translate into new opportunities for employment and growth in both economies. And that's the key to any free trade agreement, taking advantage of these new opportunities and therefore creating, through greater productivity, new opportunities for growth and employment. Any assessment of the impact of the KORUS FTA, particularly with regard to manufacturers, must focus on the auto sector. And I think it's important to spend a little time on this because it is so important and has been subject of so much unfounded criticism in the press in both Washington and Seoul. Simply I could say if the U.S. unions and the Korean unions are both against it, then one of them is wrong or both of them are wrong. And I'd bet that both of them are wrong. The reason why this is so important is when you look at bilateral merchandise trade, so much of it involves autos and auto parts. In 2005, Korea-U.S. auto trade was valued at about $11 billion, or about 16% of bilateral merchandise trade. And it's dominated by Korean car exports to the United States, a little over $10 billion worth of trade. So this disparity in access to the two markets has provoked heated concerns that continue to echo in the congressional debate. And it's one of the reasons why it was so easy for Senator Clinton earlier this week to announce that she was opposing the KORUS FTA because the provisions on autos were not balanced. From a simplistic political perspective, all you have to do is look at the amount of cars sold in the United States, exported to the United States by Korean firms, and those exported from the United States to Korea, and it's about 600,000 to 4,000. And a politician who doesn't think anymore will say, well, that's unfair, and doesn't look any deeper into the causes of this or the market conditions in both countries, or the fact that there are a number of U.S. policies that inhibit the competitiveness of U.S. firms in both the U.S. and foreign markets. The agreement itself eliminates the tariffs very quickly. That is hailed as a big thing by Korean firms to eliminate the 2.5% U.S. tariff immediately. And it is criticized by Chrysler and Ford to say it's unfair because the Koreans are getting additional advantages in the U.S. market. Well, a 2.5% cut in the tariff, which will likely be cut in any event because of the Doha round, is not going to make a significant difference in Korean competitiveness in the U.S. market. The Korean firms are interested in this because they are already facing a very tight competitiveness problem vis-a-vis Japanese exports to the U.S. market because of exchange rate changes. And if you look at what has happened over the past few years, the Korean won has appreciated significantly against the U.S. dollar, while the Japanese yen has depreciated. And this is making it more difficult for Korean automakers to not just to sell, but to maintain profit margins in the U.S. market against Japanese firms. And it also is making it more difficult for Korean automakers to compete in other export markets against Japanese competition, particularly in China. It also means that U.S. firms have more difficulty in competing against Japanese imports into the Korean market. And so even though the Korean import market share for automobiles is only 3%, trying to expand that share is difficult when the overall Korean domestic sales have been stagnant for several years, but also difficult when there is this competitive disadvantage due to relative exchange rates. The 8% cut in the Korean tariff for the U.S. Automakers will help, and it has been underappreciated by U.S. auto firms, in part because they have suffered for so long with other non-tariff barriers that have made it difficult to access or do business in the Korean market. And so there's an element of mistrust by some of the firms that the commitments will be faithfully implemented, and indeed they look back at the experience of various memorandum of understandings in the 1990s that did not resolve problems in dealing with non-tariff issues in the auto sector. So that's in part why some U.S. firms are cautiously pessimistic about the agreement, but the agreement will still leave them better off than they would be without an agreement. The other big issue was beef, and the liberalization question was the smallest part of the beef issue, and the tariffs, the high tariffs on beef, will go down very slowly over a long period of time. More important was the actual ban on the import of goods for sanitary and phytosanitary reasons, and there was a very constructive effort by both sides to resolve the issue consistent with the health and safety of Korean consumers, and with the notification of the World Animal Health Organization that reclassified U.S. exporters, there is now a procedure that can resolve this problem to meet the objectives of both countries. It is clear from congressional politics here, if the beef issue is not fully resolved, then it is highly unlikely that the president will table implementing legislation for the KORUS FTA in the Congress. That would the opposition would be too great in this, particularly in the Senate, and so while the agreement will be signed at the end of this month, so that it can qualify for the fast-track procedures of the Trade Promotion Authority, there is no time requirement on when implementing legislation would be put forward to the Congress. Final point on the Kaesong Industrial Complex. This was a sensitive political issue, one where the economic content at present was very limited, but which raised many concerns about labor practices and how one can pursue a policy of constructive engagement in the context of a free trade agreement. The initial positions were diametrically opposed. The Korean government insisted on full coverage of Kaesong and other industrial complexes. The U.S. government said absolutely not, we're imposing sanctions, and we want to restrict any financial benefits to the North Korean regime.